Um, well, I'm here in Zurich, in Murray Stein's very beautiful consulting room, and about to conduct an interview, a dialogue between us. And the context for this is that the Journal of Analytical Psychology, of which I'm on the editorial board, does from time to time uh, do organize interviews with eminent Jungians. I think that people are interested who have a long history in the field of analytical psychology. And at the last journal meeting, or a couple of journal meetings ago, I volunteered your name and volunteered myself, as we know each other for a long period of time, to interview. So it's my great pleasure to do this today, as you're somebody that has made a huge contribution in so many different areas of analytical psychology. So thank you for agreeing. Um, there will be a film made of this interview, and hopefully to maybe a slightly edited version of it in the Journal of Analytical Psychology. So thank you, Murray. Um, I wanted to start, I think, sort of to go fairly chronologically, really, and just ask you to tell me a little bit about your own background or your personal background, the environment in which you were brought up, to give a kind of setting for talking more about your professional life.
Well, I grew up in a very special setting, in the sense that my father was a pastor, a minister in a Protestant church. And so our family life was very much permeated by religion. Um, we went to church 2, 3 times a week regularly. My father preached, he taught, took care of his congregations. My mother was involved in church activities, and in our home, we would regularly um, talk about the Bible. I would hear Bible stories at breakfast. So we grew up with the Bible. The biblical world was really our world more than the world I would say that we lived in geographically. I was born in Canada, in Saskatchewan, the middle of Canada. My grandparents were pioneers there, came over from Prussia in the 19th century to get their sons out of the draft, out of the army. They didn't want them going to war. And my father was an immigrant from Germany, came over in 1930 at the age of 18, and he got involved with a group of religious people there and became a minister in the end and married my mother in this Canadian small town where I was born. And then we would, every few years, usually every 5 years was a typical sequence, we would move to a new location where my father would assume his ministerial gig. And the result of that was that we had a very tightly knit nuclear family, but we didn't relate that much to the world around us and didn't have established roots. So it was a kind of nomadic existence, which is also very biblical. I mean, the wandering Jew, we were wandering a Jewish sect called Christian. So I think my relationship to the world is very much colored by that, and my feeling of being um, uh, sort of living on the margins of society rather than in the mainstream, which has its good sides and bad sides. When I went to the University of Chicago many years later to study, the university is located on the south side of Chicago, and I had a conversation with the dean when I entered and asked him about the location of the university and so on. He said, "Well, we are a marginal community, but in the good sense." And I've never forgotten that trait. So that's how I feel in relation to the greater society. Feel somewhat on the margins of it, but making a contribution to it and living in not quite of it. And I think that was very strongly formed in reflecting on my background, and it fits in very nicely with the Jungian world, actually.
Yeah, and what was the effect on you as a child, sort of moving all the time?
Well,
I mean, I'm thinking of course, you've moved in adult life as well. It's like I lived it. So, but whether was it a positive thing for you? Did you think, or were there negative effects of uprooting?
There was one move that was more difficult than the others, and that was in the middle of my high school when I was the president of my high school class, and suddenly, my father got a call from a church far away. We moved to Detroit at that time, and uprooting and leaving those relationships. I had a girlfriend and close friends and so on. That was the most difficult one. But always in retrospect, these moves had a beneficial result because they put me into an environment that I would never experience otherwise, and they've led to things that I wouldn't have been exposed to. So this I guess you could say we rationalized. It was difficult for my mother too. She would make friends in one place and then have to move to another, and so we established this kind of persona life in relation to the community, uh, and I think the effect on her was that she wouldn't allow herself to form really close relationships with the people that she was involved with in a particular place. It put much more energy, you could say, into the family, into our family system. We really lived as a unit and moved from one place to another.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister much younger than myself. She's 10 years younger, so we're both only children in a sense. I mean, I was there for her early years. I babysat, but we don't have a close relationship now, although we're in contact with each other. She lives in Canada and has a family.
So, would you say that? I mean, what I'm picking up from what you say is that in a way, the environment in which you were brought up gave you the potential for an internal life and a capacity for self-sustaining yourself and
Very much.
imagination. Because my experience of you is that although you do relate to the world, as you said, as being quite an introverted man. Yeah. So is that would that be fair? Do you think?
I think I take after my mother in that regard. On her side of the family, they were a more introvert. My father was an extroverted feeling type, very good for the ministry. People loved him. He didn't insist on dogmatic formulations, or he wasn't a strict sort of rule person. My mother was more that way, introverted thinking. She had a degree in mathematics and later became a teacher of math in high school, and was very creative in her own way, but an introverted thinking type, and I take after her. So I'm probably naturally that way. But the way we lived also gave a lot of space for, as you say, the inner world. It was the biblical world, but it's a world of imagination, texts, and interpreting texts, and that's been my life really, interpreting texts and people's lives with them and analysis, and yeah.
So would you say then that you were? I mean, I was also thinking about moving that you were quite adaptable. That when you say sometimes things are difficult, but they had a good outcome, which suggests you have or had certainly then a capacity to adapt to or find creative things in the environments that you find yourself.
I think I am very adaptable, yes. Uh, and my father was very adaptable. My mother a little less so. She was more fragile, but I think I was very adaptable. And when we would move to a new house, we would bring our things along, but it wasn't our house. It's like we were living there for a while. We were camping there, and then we would move to another one.
And these were houses that you were given, presumably.
Manses, yeah, they belonged to the church, and we'd move into them and move out of them. Um, and so, we had to be pretty adaptive to new environments, and either I learned that or I had that ability. It hasn't been hard for me to live in new places, with one exception, and that's when I left training in Zurich and moved to Houston, Texas. That was a very difficult environment to adjust to.
What did you not like about that?
The climate, the heat, and the culture was so different from anything I had experienced in the North, United States. That's very different subcultures. And the Texan culture is very specific. It's what we call redneck mostly, very conservative. anti-intellectual. It just didn't. It was not a fit. That was I made some very good friends there. Met my second wife there. Very happy about that. But uh, it was a very difficult to move from Zurich and its emphasis on the inner life and intellectual life and all that that I experienced here with my teachers and friends to go into that environment was very difficult. But after that, after 3 years there, we then moved to Chicago, and, Chicago was a much better fit. Felt like home.
And what I think you were an English major originally at Yale, is that right?
Yes.
You can you tell me a bit about the beginnings of your professional path and what drew you first to English and then theology, I think, wasn't it? And then later
Yeah.
to analytical psychology.
As a boy, I was interested in math and science, and I wanted to become a doctor. That was my first career goal when I was a teenager. Mm, and then I had some teachers when we made this move to Detroit. The importance of teachers in my life is not to be underestimated. Um, I had some teachers at the high school. We had a small group called a fast track, or kind of elite group in that huge high school in Detroit. And we had wonderful teachers, especially in English, history, social studies, philosophy. We had small clubs. There was a theater club, there was a classics club. We would go to theater together in Detroit those times. Detroit was a very livable city in those days. And so my interest switched from math and science to the humanities, liberal arts, English, and history, and so on. And when I went to Yale, I had no idea what I wanted to study really, except it would be in somewhere in this area, the liberal arts. And again, it was teachers that the English department was outstanding at Yale in those days. It was world famous. And so the teachers were very inspiring. Harold Bloom was one of my teachers. Yeah, I've never gotten over Harold Bloom. I'm still occasionally in contact with him. And so they were just, they were on fire with, their subjects. And I had a wonderful teacher also in religious studies. Um, his name was Hans Fry. Um, so the teachers really inspired me to go in certain directions of study. When I started out, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I ended up majoring in English literature with a minor in religious studies, largely because of the teachers. Again, still not knowing what I would eventually focus on for a career. Uh, but that wasn't emphasized in college in those days. College was a time to explore, learn about history and the world, and open your eyes to what's out there in the cultural world. And so it was a wonderful place to spend 4 years. At the end of that, I had to decide uh, on the next step, and a career path. And still, I wasn't at all certain what I wanted to do. There were three main choices. One would be to continue graduate studies in English literature with Harold Bloom. He invited me to join the department there. He was disappointed that I didn't. I chose to go with Hans Fry to the divinity school. But it was important to stay in school in those days because the Vietnam War was really heating up. 1965. If you stepped out of school for a few months, you'd be drafted into the war. I certainly didn't want to do that. So many of us stayed for that reason, if no other, in graduate programs. And so I went to the divinity school at Yale, which was also very fine. The faculty was outstanding, and I enjoyed the studies. But I didn't particularly want to be a minister, although that was in my family tradition, this sort of uh, idea of serving in a religious community.
I was going to ask you there that, I suppose that gives you something in common with Jung that anyway, that in terms of your fathers, but I was going to ask how important your father was in influencing you one way or the other, you know?
He was very liberal. He was very open. I think, I mean, if I'd wanted to go into a field of criminality or something, certainly objective, but my choices were the law, and law school was one option, graduate school in English, divinity school. I think to him it was quite, he didn't have any strong preferences. I think my mother might have preferred, religious direction, but they didn't put any pressure on me at all. I
Yeah, they allowed you to find your way.
Yes, yeah, within parameters. I mean, I was always pretty much a good boy, a good student. They could trust me to make fairly reasonable decisions, and I think I did most of the time. I did some things they wouldn't have approved of course, like everybody does, but within certain parameters, they were very free.
So then, the theology was, not to become a minister, but what was in your mind that
Well, there was a syndrome called the Rockefeller syndrome at the Divinity School. The Rockefellers family provided funds for students to come and spend a year at the Divinity School just to get a taste of, history of Christianity and so on. And so a lot of the students there were not, it wasn't training for the ministry so much as kind of studying ethics, Christian history and theology, the Bible. Um, um, some of them, I would say less than half, but some of them went into the ministry. Some went on to get a PhD in religious studies or theology and became professors. That would have been my option. If I'd stayed in that area, I would have done that rather than take a church ministry. I did have a church for one summer, and I enjoyed it. Nice people, country church. But that wasn't really I'm too introverted for that, I think. So it would have either been an academic life or what I found when I found you, which was something totally new, and it was like a miracle.
can you say a bit more about that? Because that I mean, that's something having, the things of yours that I've read is always this huge loyalty to Jung. In fact, I read somewhere that you talked about, not so much personally, but generally about people being haunted by Jung, and that struck me as quite a very powerful
Yeah.
word. So it would be good to hear a bit more about how you found Jung and what it was and why it had such a powerful impact on you.
Um, I don't know. For some reason, I could really identify with Jung. The first book I read, which was at the suggestion of a person I knew, I took a year off from divinity school and lived in Washington, D.C., 1968, the year of assassinations and city burnings. It was a wild time. And a friend of mine, we were discussing war and why people, nations, the history of war and so on. He said, well, you should read Jung on the subject of projection and shadow. Well, Jung, I'd heard of Jung maybe a few times in college and around, but it was never on the agenda, academic studies in my time. So I went to the bookstore the next day and bought the one book of Jung's that was available, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and I couldn't put it down. I thought, um, there, I, uh, I could identify with this man, his emphasis on the inner world and the inner life, and perfect for an introvert, of course. Introverted thinking type loves that kind of. But what really caught my attention was his what you could call eccentricities, his attention to dreams, to imagination, to he was a psychoanalyst. I had read Freud as a boy, as a teenager. I read Interpretation of Dreams, was fascinated by it, but didn't have any idea of entering that profession. It was medical, and it was not something I really looked into. And I didn't know anything about the profession of Jungian analysis. Nothing, zero. I didn't know it existed. Institutes, training programs, nothing. I read that book, and then I started looking up references, and it was like discovering in the dream where you discover a new room in your house, and I walked into it, and it was a huge library. I found Neumann in there, I found von Franz in there. I found, wonders, and I couldn't put it down. So I started reading mainly Jung and Neumann, and then I met a person at the divinity school when I went back for my 3rd year who had been in Zurich on a sabbatical and had studied at the Jung Institute, and he was in charge of pastoral counseling and pastoral studies at the divinity school. He and I formed a relationship, so I would meet with him twice a week and discuss my dreams with him. He was a very skilled therapist. He'd studied with Carl Rogers at the University of Chicago and was a humanistic psychotherapist and a pastoral counselor. But now had become a Jungian. So we worked on my dreams, and he introduced me to um, this whole world of psychotherapy. I got a job at a clinic for that year. I worked 20 or 30 hours a week in a mental health center. And he told me about the institute in Zurich. So I wrote off to the institute and got their program and asked if I could come there and study when I finished with my divinity school studies that year. And I got a letter back saying, sure, from the director of studies, signed James Hillman, who was the director of and I'd read one of his books, In Search, which is a very good, one of my favorite books of Hillman's, it's on psychology and religion. And it's wonderful. It's before he went off into archetypal psychology. And so that was my invitation to come over here. So my life,
What age were you then,
I was 25.
Yeah, 25. So it was, well, I feel like using a word like fate, or it was a momentous event waiting to happen.
Exactly.
Do you see it like that?
I do. When I discovered Jung's term synchronicity, I thought, wow, that really, it's an experience. I don't know about if the theory works all that well, but when you look back on your life and you see these moments and the timing of the moments, that moment when I picked up Jung's book was exactly the right moment because I was totally in flux.
Yep.
I could have gone this way, that way. I didn't know really, I didn't have a direction. And that galvanized it. It just dropped in at the right moment.
Which is the essence of Jungian psychology, isn't it? To be open to unexpected things, new things, that there's a purpose to them.
That you do somewhere. You don't know at the moment, but then in retrospect, you see the timing was extraordinary.
But it had an enormous feeling effect on you.
Huge, yeah. It was more than that intellectual. When Errol Bloom invited me to go on and study English, I thought about it, and my feeling about it was that the air is too thin there. It was so purely intellectual of the head. Of course, studying literature, Shakespeare, poetry, and so on also had a lot of feeling in it, but it was a scholarly pursuit. You did nothing but sit in the library all day long. At the end, you wrote some more books and papers, gave some lectures. It was all from here up. Jung and what that door that opened connected to much deeper areas of the psyche, dreams, imagination, a whole world of feeling and emotion. And then working with people on that basis is very different from teaching in an academic program when you're working in analysis with individuals. So it opened a door to a profession I didn't know existed that satisfied so many different levels. I wouldn't even call them needs, but just, levels of the psyche. It was like a key coming into a lock and perfectly. From my psychology, my background, my interest.
Mm. I read when you came to Zurich, I think it's one of the two, I can't remember, there was the paper that you wrote for Vilnius or the one that you gave recently, yeah. But it was something to do with, it amused me, that you when you came to Zurich, Jung had had such a big impact on you, and his his work that you expected there to be a Jungstrasse and that you expected there to be monuments to him and was surprised that there weren't.
I was shocked, and of course, the Young Institute at that time was one floor of a house, it had been built as a house of the bourgeois in the 19th century.
So it wasn't in
It
Kussnacht
wasn't
then.
in Küsnacht, it was Gemeindestrasse in Zurich, just one floor with one big room and a small library. And I was used to Yale University, I mean, huge, impressive buildings. This was so it's, kind of a downsizing. That didn't bother me so much, but when I asked, "Where is Jung, memorialized in this city? Don't you know he's a world famous figure? He's been on the cover of Time magazine. Everybody in America knows his name." Well, I was exaggerating, but I thought in his own city, there isn't a street or a Platz or a nothing. And to this day, there's nothing. You could go to Küsnacht even. People have said at the train station, ask, "Where is Jung's house?" And they say, "Who? Jung?" Yeah. Um, but that's the way the Swiss are. I mean,
Yes, I was wondering why you think that is.
um, I think there are a number of reasons that Jung is not more honored in Zurich. One, he was an outsider and a controversial figure. An outsider, not in the sense that he wasn't Swiss, but he came from Basel. Um, and he was to the Swiss mentality, he was a strange person. Um, he was not a conventional Swiss doctor, and also his reputation was badly tarnished in the 30s by his all the controversy about Germany, and was he too involved with German doctors and the professional association, and too optimistic about what was going on there at first, and so on. And that has remained on his, uh, 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 to his detriment to this day around the world, also in Switzerland. So I think that was a reason. Plus, I think the Swiss tend not to hold up people too much. It isn't common for a street to be named after an individual. There are a few in Zurich. Pestalozzi is a place. He's a famous 19th century educator. And Guisan, who was a general during the First World War, and so on. There are a few, but they were really public figures. Um, and Jung didn't achieve that level of recognition in Switzerland. He's much more famous internationally than he is.
Well, I was about to say that that's partly due to you, in the sense that I was wondering whether there might be a connection between, the huge impact Jung had and then not finding these things in Zurich and what you have done, what has been a big part of your professional life, which is to facilitate pathways to develop analytical psychology in so many different ways and in so many different cultures too.
Well, I think what happened was that once I got involved in the Jungian community, which I didn't know existed at first, and during my training, there wasn't much of a sense of that. But when I went back to the States and, the years, I went back in 1973, and the next 15 to 20 years were boom time for Jungian uh, interest in the United States. Huge conferences developed, and I got involved in starting training programs immediately. When I got there, the Interregional Society was formed in Chicago, and I was very involved in those. Became a supervisor way before my time. I was only 30 years old when I began, um, but they needed people to, contribute. And I got involved in this field, and I started thinking about it as a field. And I think I developed the kind of relationship to this field that my father had to his congregations. I mean, if I look at patterns, a kind of a feeling of service. You're serving a community, um, and so. a lot of the things I've done have been when people ask me, "Why are you doing that? You aren't getting paid very much for it," or, you know, um, it's been hard for me to figure it out, but I think this notion of service has been
So that's
absolutely critical.
so that's the identification with your father at some sort. Can we go back just a bit? 'Cause, my fault for taking us on a bit, but what was it like to train in Zurich when you trained? Um, and well, what was important in analytical psychology then? Um,
It was so different from any educational institution or experience I'd ever had in that it was so, minimally structured.
hmm,
Um, it was open. You could go to classes if you wanted to, if you didn't want the European university system. Basically, you have to take exams and pass the exams to go on. Plus, the feeling that really the heart and soul of training is analysis. It isn't studying the books and taking exams and writing papers. It's your own personal work. That had never been considered in my educational experience. It wasn't a topic. And here it was the center. So the analytic work, and we all went to analysis twice a week was the standard. When I went and signed up for the training program, uh, I asked for names of analysts. How do you make contacts? So I got a list. And for those who spoke English fluently, there was a star beside their name, and I went down the list. And I saw the name Richard Pope starred beside his name. I thought, well, that's an interesting name. I'll try that. English, obviously. And I called him on phone, and he answered it. And
mhm, puts you in touch with something from that. Yeah, he was important person for you.
yes, the analysts were the heart and soul
Mm,
of the training. I don't know if he was a great analyst, but I heard my father's voice.
mhm. Well, I was going to ask you, it's clear, don't have to ask you that somehow analysis with him was very profound
Very profound.
for you.
Well, and engaging with dreams, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. He was English, went to Oxford, very intelligent man. He wasn't a writer. He was a pretty good teacher, but he was a wonderful analyst with a very light touch. And so I could talk about anything and we could laugh. And he was very engaging, didn't talk too much, let me fill the space. He had just the right touch for me. And then it was required to see two analysts during training, a man and a woman. So my second analyst was Hilda Binswanger. And I chose her. I can't remember if I had a dream. I think I had a dream about her after I heard a lecture of hers. And she was the daughter of Ludwig Binswanger, so she had this existential background. She was a Jungian, but also existential. And she had visited Freud with her father when she was a child. And so she gave a very different perspective from Pope's, who was von Franz classical. Yeah.
But what was it well, as you know, in the UK, we've always had a system you have one analyst and not two during training. But given that the effect of Richard Pope on you, what did it feel like to be forced to change? I mean,
Well, by the time I had 2 years with him, I think I was ready to change. And I liked her. It was a very different kind of transference. I'd say it was in a sense, it was a deeper transference. It was a mother transference. She wasn't a mother, literally. I don't think she ever married, but she had a very, um, I don't know, welcoming and a kind of symbolic person. So I could enter into her world and imagine her life, and she shared. memories and experiences with me, and we formed a very nice relationship.
Mm. So it was a particular form of analysis, but,
He was a mother and he was a father,
yeah.
and it was like that, yeah.
And what did you broadly what do you feel you got from your, uh, periods in analysis that you've taken forward?
Well, a kind of, connection to myself, that I didn't and would have never had without analysis. So I think you uh, just delving into your own interior with somebody else who accompanies you, and you look at your history and your complexes and your shadow and your dreams, and I don't think I could have uh, become nearly as productive and creative as I've been without them. Um, Mainly, I think what it did at an early age, I was in my 20s and finished when I was 30, was that it opened me up to my feeling life, my instinctual life, that had never been considered. And that served me well in the long run. Not that I mastered it in any sense of the word at all, but it taught me a kind of awareness of inner process and openness, uh, um, what emerges in oneself, not rejecting what doesn't look very promising at first. And
Mm. And who were your teachers then? I mean, who was, because it was still fairly, it was only a little bit more than, well, shortly after Jung's death, really, a few years after.
you know,
So you didn't meet Jung?
I didn't meet Young. He died in 61. I came
Yeah.
at 69, but there were people. But Franz was at her peak.
Yeah.
And
Was if she was one of your teachers?
she was a lecturer. I had never heard much about her. I didn't know. I think I'd heard her name a few times. Maybe I'd read something. But I went to listen to a lecture of hers, a series, and I was just blown over. I thought, this is like listening to God speak. She knows everything. I mean, she was uh, brilliant. She was lecturing on the Puer Aeternus. This is her famous Puer Aeternus book. And so, but I didn't want to, I don't know, she was too much for me to get very close to. And I was very satisfied with my analyst. And so I didn't do any personal work with her. The only personal contact I had with her was to edit one of her books, the Creation Myths book. And so we had some correspondence and exchanges. So I didn't really get close to her, but she was a significant teacher on on the stage. Marvelous lecture, few notes. She would just speak. People would write down what she said, and they published books like that. That's where her fairy tale books came from. Just spoken. And but I think Hillman was a very important influence as a teacher. Now he had fallen into disgrace just about the time I got here, and he left for a year to the States. I think he had some teaching appointments at the University of Chicago or at Yale, and then he came back.
He was in disgrace because.
There was a scandal. He'd gotten involved sexually with one of his patients, and the husband found out and threatened a lawsuit, and he was fired from his job at the institute, and it was a huge scandal. And he um, he paid a dear price for that in Zurich. But he came back, and he came back with Spring Journal from New York, which Spring Journal had started in New York in the 50s, I think, and they gave it to him, or he bought it, and he brought it back, and I went to work for him. I became his general manager for spring publications. And he was lecturing at that time, and he was developing, it was very exciting, developing archetypal psychology. And I wrote my first papers um, sort of under his umbrella influence, and he published them in Spring Journal.
And what were they?
They were on a Greek mythology and psychology, Hephaestus, paper on Hephaestus, a paper on Narcissus. So I'd pick Greek figures that had some connection to psychological themes and human interpretation. So those are my first papers in methodological psychological studies, or archetypal psychology, as he came to call it later. Um, so he was a very important teacher. Barbara Hanna was a teacher at that time, and she was told wonderful stories about Jung. She had accompanied him on all kinds of excursions and trips. She knew him very well, knew Emma, knew their family. And so her lectures would always be filled with examples from Jung said this to me, and then he did that. And she would say things like, well, when Jung got angry at me, and Jung had a terrible temper, people often complain about it, he would get angry at me, but I always knew after it all blew over that it was for my own good. He was teaching me with his anger. Well, you got that version of Jung. And she wrote a wonderful memoir about Jung and Jung's life and times. So it's a classic. Um, so she was a teacher. Yolanda Jacobi was still teaching at that time. Mario Jacobi was just beginning. He had graduated a few years earlier, but he was a up and coming star. Guggenbiel was teaching at that time. I did supervision with Guggenbiel. But these were very important figures in my friend.
Oh, very, yes, lucky to have all those speakers. And how did you develop a clinical practice then? How did it work at the time you trained? How did you find your patients? Yes, before you went back to the States.
Yeah, you had to do supervisions, of course, during the control stage of training. And those came through a service at the Institute. They would be referred to the students. So I got my first student analysis practice cases through the referral service. I can't remember how many I had, maybe a half dozen or so.
In English or in German?
Uh, Mostly in English, but I could work in German, so I had a couple in German. We spoke German at home when I grew up. My father was there.
Yes, so you had a feel for.
I had a few other language. Yeah, I studied it in college. German was not too difficult for me. So I had a couple of Nalazans in German, the rest in English. One was a mathematics student at university, or American, who was doing postgrad work. I think he was my first one, and we stayed in contact for many years. I've lost touch with him now. I think he may have retired and had a problem with dementia or something in his later years, but we stayed in contact for a long while, became friends after a while. Um, so that's how, and there is a student referral service now at ISAP as well, and a lot of students benefit from that to get their practice cases through your referral service. And if you stayed long enough, then word of mouth, then
Yeah.
you start.
So how many years were you in Zurich?
4 years.
4 years. And was it always your intention to go back to the States?
Yes, because another chance encounter. When I came at the opening tea of the first year, the semester would open with a tea, a reception. New students and analysts would be there. And I was there as just a beginner, and a friend of mine from Yale had come over too, and he was just going to spend a semester or two. And there were a couple of very attractive girls at the tea, and he made their acquaintance. I was married, so I stayed away. One was too beautiful. She was a model from Paris, and the other one was from a very wealthy family in Texas. And he made their acquaintance, and through him, they learned that I would probably be needing funds to complete my training. I came over here on a shoestring. I didn't know how to do it. I figure it'll work out somehow. So through that Texas girl, the Houston Young Center um, arranged to pay me a stipend, a monthly uh, amount of money. If in exchange for that, when I finished, I would go to Houston and teach at the Young Center and start my practice there. So it was agreed from very early on that I would end up in Houston. And that was a windfall for me because it it made trading much easier. It didn't quite cover all the costs, but a large part of it. And for the rest, I found jobs like working for Hillman and so on. And I taught at the American high school for a year, English. Um, but I kind of looked forward to going back. I think if I could have stayed in Switzerland, I would have. I really loved it here. I love this country and just the culture, the politics. It's quiet, it's safe, it's reliable. It's a very nice place to live. And the unions were here, and I had lots of friends in the union community about that too. So if I could have, I would have stayed here, but I couldn't. So I went back to the States under that agreement.
And that's where you met Jan.
That's where I met you.
Yeah, so there must have been a huge personal upheaval. You were married to one person at the yeah,
Yes, yeah.
yeah.
That was part of my life in Houston. That upheaval, going through a divorce, and then getting involved with Jan and children. She had a couple of children. I had a child. Well, how do we manage that? So we had to sort all that out, and then we moved to Chicago after I was in Houston a total of 3 years. So it was a very difficult time.
Turbulent, yes. Yeah.
Turbulent.
Mm.
I learned a lot in that time. It was a huge life experience. And out of that grew my book in midlife. It was a little early midlife, but it was like a midlife crisis going through a dissolve, liminality, reorganizing yourself with a new set of goals and identity, so on. And the book In Midlife is based on that experience, although I don't include the experience in the book, but that's
It's what
what sort of
yeah.
grew out of that experience.
Well, that might be a nice time to talk a bit about your writing. Um, you've written an awful lot, and what struck me about I haven't read everything that you've written, but I've read quite a lot. And Jung's Map of the Soul is a book I think it's absolutely best sort of introductory text that I always recommend to pre-trainees and trainees because it's so beautifully written that I it, I think what struck me about your writing, well, firstly how close you stick to Jung always, but never repetitively. And that's the thing that struck me most, that how that 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 how you bring your own thinking and ideas to this sort of bedrock of Jungian understanding. Um, so I was going to, I mean, you started already, but what stimulated you to what helped you to write, or what was going on that made you think, I think I do want to write? And how has that evolved?
Yeah, I've always written something, in school, and I was an English major. We had to write a lot.
So you could always write.
Could always write, yeah. But you there are different ways of writing, and when I think about my books, they're different in a certain. Some are more personal, based more on personal experience. Some are more expository, like Jung's Map of the Soul, explaining Jung's basic ideas. Um, but writing at first was, as it is for almost everybody, it's difficult. You have to learn how to write. It's not a natural gift. You're a singer. You have a good voice, but you have to train it. You have to work hard at it.
Yeah.
And writing's like that until you hit a stride where it does come easier, and you know what you sound like. You know what your sentences. There's a kind of musicality that's specific to an author, and that takes a while to get to. Um, I had a few crises in writing, and one of them is, I'll never forget. I wrote a piece. One of the first books I created was Jungian analysis, and it was a compilation of essays by Libby L.
Yes.
United States. Um, and I wrote the introduction, and we all sent our chapters to an editor, and I got my chapter back with comments. And the editor sent this author. I think they didn't know who the authors were. This author needs to go back and learn how to write. He should read Strunk and White. Now, Strunk and White was a book I read in high school. It's called The Elements of Style. It's a great teacher for writing clear English sentences. And I had made mine way too complicated and convoluted, and this editor couldn't understand what I was trying to say. It was opaque. Go back to Strunk and White. So I did. And from that, I got a very strong feeling for what clear writing is. If I can't understand my sentence, others aren't going to understand it either. So I tested on myself. I will say it out loud to myself, or if I have any question, I'll look up something, but I want clarity. And I think many people have told me that my writings tend to be clear, and I strive for clarity. Uh, because I think I basically want to communicate clear messages uh, that can be understood by people who aren't um, overly, let's say, sophisticated or knowledgeable about the field. Um, when I wrote my book, Jung's Treatment of Christianity, however, which was my doctoral dissertation at the University of Chicago. So some of my books have been written on demand. I had to write a dissertation and then I rewrote it for publication. But I sent it to my mother and she commented on it. Well, I hope someday you'll write books that people really can read.
That must have been very upsetting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was too much for her, I guess. It was a doctoral dissertation and it was, kind of steeped in academic jargon a bit, although I don't think it reads too badly. But um, so writing has been a very important part of my career as a Jungian analyst, and it's been a wonderful um, field to write for. The Jungian field has been very receptive. I mean, some fields are crowded, there are too many people, it's gone uh, in directions that you can't relate to anymore. English studies, English, uh, literary studies are not to my taste at all anymore. I can read Bloom and people of that generation, but when it got into postmodernism and deconstructionism and all that, to me, it's a exercise in futility. It's silly, as Bloom thinks too. It's nonsense, but it's a kind of game that people are playing with literary texts. Um, but Jungian psychology was this open field, and people were very receptive to receiving, um, books and articles, and then I started a publishing company, and
That's Chiron.
that's Chiron,
Mm.
yeah, uh, and that was to publish the Ghost Ranch uh, lectures. We had these Ghost Ranch conferences every year, and we started this publishing company to publish them, and then it grew into a much wider. Uh,
And how have your areas of interest that you write about changed? I mean, you talked about midlife, but that was obviously based on a sort of personal upheaval. But it'd be interesting, I think, to trace that up until now in your most recent book.
well, um, I think after a certain time writing some of these early essays and editing some books and during the Ghost Ranch, each year we had to present a paper. I presented a paper most years, but I hit a theme that I think has been my more or less my leitmotif through most of the books since then, and that is individuation. This idea that Jung came up with, he says quite a lot about it, and we teach about it, and that struck me as a thread that runs through Jungian psychology. It's something we work on in analysis. It's something we can teach about and write about and illustrate with myths and fairy tales, and so it became a kind of um theme around which I wrote many essays, and my collected works. So that's probably the most important single theme that I've chosen to focus on. And uh, so in midlife was actually an early contribution to that because it's midlife is a important moment in individuation. And then I followed up on that with a book called uh, Transformation, Emergence of the Self, which is a kind of extension of the midlife. What happens in the course of a individuation process? How does a person actually become him or herself? And what are the stages of that and how does it look? So that's a book about individuation. I use the image of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly in this metamorphosis process that we undergo several times in life, and then we emerge as the person that we probably always were in some sense, potentially, and become in the course of the years. And the other thing that's really interested me about this theme of individuation, which I say is Jung's contribution to developmental psychology. He was a developmentalist. Ford focused on early years and Jung focused on later years, but Jung was definitely a developmental psychologist. And he focused on the second half of life and its extensions into old age, which as I get older, I find more and more interesting. So I find myself reading Jung's later works more now and thinking about what I call advanced stage individuation, um, which is a kind of more spiritual extension of individuation. Um, and that ties into a recent interest I've had in Buddhism. So I think I'm taking it more in that direction now.
And is that influenced by, well, being in your later years now, do you think that spirituality becomes more important? I mean, the latest book about the Bible, yeah, stories,
Right.
as a metaphor in it, yeah.
Well, I think spirituality started becoming a strong interest of mine a ways back, probably after 50.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't pay too much attention to it specifically. But in recent years, more like, uh, and I think dreams have led me in that direction. My own dreams. My wife has marvelous dreams. Um, and many of them have suggestions, intimations of spirituality, or maybe that's the way we're interpreting them more and more. Um, and of course, one's body, I wouldn't say becomes less important, but in some ways it becomes more important because there are more problems coming up all the time. But um, the satisfaction of physical needs, while still very gratifying, don't have the same urgency, and other needs, I would say, would develop a stronger presence. I remember talking to Judith Hubbock about this in her later years, and she went back and studied, I think, with a priest. And
She was through my own list. Judith Hopatcutch.
I remember speaking with her about it. She had been a socialist, changed the world. And so I think that's fairly typical of later years. I find culture also more interesting. I like reading biographies. So and opera. I enjoyed listening to music more than I did before, maybe. Especially, I've been reading about Wagner lately, and I didn't like Wagner so much before, but now I've been advised by several authors I've read, ignore his life. It was terrible. He was a jerk. Um, and don't pay too much attention to the text of the operas. Listen to the music. Just listen to the
Yeah.
music. And so that's what I've been doing.
Well, somebody just said that to me last night, as it happens. I agree. So,
So the music, it does transport you. And
although they are good stories, actually. I mean, they are interesting stories. Unusually for opera, they are interesting stories, yeah. So, do you have more writing in you? I mean, do you
I
have
keep writing.
ideas and, Yeah.
I keep writing. Steve Buser, who now owns Chiron Publications with his partner Len Cruz, bought it from Nathan Schwartzland and myself 5 years ago or so. Wants to produce a collected works.
Opposite, that would be a very good idea. Yes.
That takes me back. That would be a big project. I haven't really started that yet. Uh, but I've started working on some of my lectures that I did. In Midlife was originally given as a series of lectures. I then wrote it up as a
In America.
in America.
Mm.
This Bible book, which I've titled "The Bible as Dream," was a series of lectures that I gave 20 years ago at Chicago. I'm working on another series of lectures that I gave on masculine development. Um, so that kind of writing, picking up some of these old things that had dropped off my desk and reviewing them and partially rewriting and extending. So I'm working on that. I've recently written a play with Henry Abramovich, as you know,
Yes, which I've came to see for this.
and I'm thinking of a sequel to that. So yeah, writing continues to be a pleasure. I enjoy it.
And do you write in a disciplined way every day, or do you just wait for inspiration and then go to your computer? Or do you write by hand?
Oh, I learned something as a freshman in college from a professor, and he said, if you have 10 minutes, don't waste it. Use it. Take some notes, look up something. And I've written a lot in very short periods of time. Just I can do that. Some people need to take off 3 weeks to write an essay. I write it in bits and pieces as I have an hour here and an hour there.
Time of a day? Morning, evening, any time?
Not evening.
Not evening.
After 5 o'clock, I read in the evenings, but I can't write. So early morning is very good. I take a walk every day. I try to walk for 30 or 40 minutes. And during my walk, I come up with ideas. Walking is a very creative time for me. Phrases come to me, titles for books come to me.
It's the movement.
It's the movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I continue to have ideas and I continue to write down ideas, and then I'll make some notes and I'll start creating a file. Might write a page here, a page there. It evolves like that. And then if I have a deadline, of course, I have to take time, and a lot of my writings have been done according to deadlines. I have to give a talk.
And do you have a trusted person that you run things past, or do you trust yourself to go today?
Really brave. I read it past my wife. She's a very, very strong critic. Um, uh, I mean, she likes when I write, but she will find flaws that I didn't see, and she won't let go until I fix it. And so it's good. It's a good exercise. That's about it. I always submit it to an editor, and they might have some advice, but no, usually uh, I try to read it for myself. If it satisfies me, if it moves me, if that sometimes brings tears to my eyes, that's always a good sign. I can't always say it out loud but I like to write things that will move people as well as inform them or instruct them. And I think that's my background in English poetry. I studied English. It was really English poetry, and poetry is meant to move the emotions and the mind.
Well, I think that's what strikes me about your writing, which is certainly not true of everybody, that it's not dry. It lives, and I mean that's certainly been my experience of things of yours that I've read. Um, Maybe we can move on a bit. I don't think we could have this conversation without talking about the IAV. I think that's sort of first where I got to know you and as well. But um, tell me a bit how you got involved with the IAP and how you see the IAP as having evolved and where it is now. What future? No.
Well, I was chosen. I'm the chosen. which is an interesting experience. I was chosen by Tom Kirsch
To be the honorary
to
secretary.
be the honorary secretary. But before that, he chose me to be a member of the program committee for the Congress in Berlin. So that was my first exposure to IAP. Tom Kirsch and I took a walk one day. I was lecturing in San Francisco, and he asked me if I'd be interested. I knew a little bit about the IAP before that, but not much. So that was an introduction. Then I met the executive committee, Diekman, and so on. At that time, Diekman was president. And then he chose me to be honorary secretary, so I got deeply involved. And then I started traveling for the IAP, South America. We went together to China, Tom and I, and traveled quite a lot to various congresses and so on. And then I got into the system and became, vice president and went on to become president. So uh, it was an opening to the whole international community that was fabulous. I didn't know, much about it before. I knew it was there, but I got to meet a lot of people, travel to different countries, interact with them, and also to work on the executive committee of the IAP, which was also a very enriching experience. We worked so well together. The committees I were on, I served on, were never had any deep conflicts or just difficulties within the committee. We all worked together very well. So I worked with Raina Cost after Tom and Luigi Zoya, and Andrew was his fundraiser.
So is that part of the adaptability that you have, do you think? Because there certainly can be conflicts. Yes.
Yeah, there can be. We were so busy with creating the developing group system and then the router system, we didn't have much time for conflicts. Those came later when these programs became somewhat came into dispute. But when Verena was president, we started the developing groups program, and we also created the possibility for people to train in various parts of the country. We call them routers now. That's a word.
That's your word.
Live on an airplane and they
Routers, even though sometimes says they're
on the route. In parts of the world where there are no training programs, it wouldn't be possible for those people to get training. They might be able to read and we could translate books and so on. So creating those programs and then developing the structures you need for them, this was a lot of work. And Verena was strongly behind it. Luigi was strongly behind it. I was. So we saw eye to eye on all those things. And we worked very well together in the harness and in without any serious conflicts. The I became very, very involved in the Router program, as you know, and with the Russian program that you were so involved with. When I visited Moscow the first time, I think it was in 2000, and I saw what was there, what the potential was, and that there was this opening that I thought, well, I grew up in the Cold War. Now we have this opportunity. We can actually travel there. We can actually talk to these people. They can read the books. How long will this last? Who knows? So we've got to use this opportunity. And the people I met were so engaging and interested and intelligent and educated. I saw it as a tremendous opportunity and put a lot of energy into it, as did you and Catherine and others going to Russia so often and regularly.
But what struck me about that, which I think was more of a personal quality, was that we had your trust. I think it was when you were president, you put a lot of money into the IAP, but you sort of trusted us somehow, which I always felt was a very important personal quality of yours, to be able to delegate and to be able to, through your early experiences, trust others to take this work on. You know.
I trusted you and Catherine, absolutely. I don't know why. I think it was just an intuition. When I met you and we had a conversation, I forget, was it Cambridge or wherever, I thought, wow, this is solid. So I never had a doubt about your capacities to do that and willingness and reliability. Some of the others, I wasn't so involved with, but some of them would go for a while and then have to stop and, they were in and out. Um, but you carried on there for the whole the whole time that it was in existence as an IAP program and, did a wonderful job.
How do you understand? Because I found it difficult at the time, and I was in the middle of the IAP executive committee at that time. How do you understand the uh, well, it was a kind of anger and resentment
Yeah, and that
that went on in some parts of the States and here in Switzerland towards these programs, because I must say, I could never fully make sense of it.
well, I couldn't either. I was out of the internal workings of it by that time, but I did hear a lot about it, and by that time, I was living in Zurich. And the impression I got from some of the Zurich people was that they thought it was taking away from their programs, that it was siphoning people off who otherwise would come here and train, and they need students here. This is a residential training program. They need people to come
Yes.
train. So that was one thing. The other thing was they were fearful that these people were not getting adequate training. And I assured them from what I saw in examinations, in interviews, that these people were every bit as qualified and well trained as the people in the programs. They worked extremely hard. They worked in a different way, but yeah, they didn't grow up in a 4 or 5 years in an intense Jungian community like we have here in Zurich. But compared to the trainings, for instance, in the States, which are often weekend trainings once a month, it was every bit as adequate, and then in time, some of them would come here to do some of their training, come to London. So I assured them, and I still believe it, that, I'm not so sure about China. I don't know the Chinese situation, and I'm a little more skeptical of China than I am of Russia was of Russia. But, uh, so those 2 things that it might be taking away from our training programs, it's secondly that it's siphoning. Well, and also siphoning energy out because some of the analysts were spending a lot of
Well,
time
that's
or
I think that's true. Yes.
yes, as it did you.
Yes.
And quality, that was the other big consideration. It doesn't have quality.
And how do you see, given these programs which have grown hugely, hmm, how do you see the 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 community of analytical psychology now, and how do you see it developing in the future?
Well, it's very international now. When I started, this was in the '80s and '90s, it was European, North American, little bit of South America, Brazil. Uh, but, now it's extremely international. Asia's and the next president will be Japanese. All over the world, these programs are growing, in these new places especially. So I think in time, it will change, the texture of, um, the IAP because it will become more, influenced by other cultures that it has been. It isn't going to be as Eurocentric. It isn't going to maybe be as focused on the classical texts. Maybe new teachers will Japan, for instance, their great teacher is, Io Kawai. He wrote 100 books. They all quote Kawai. They've read much more Kawai than Jung. And that will happen in these other countries too, I'm sure. So it will, and it's happened in Brazil. Byington is the big star in Brazil. They study Byington, uh, all of his works and quote him. And so you get these different enclaves. And that's why it's so important to have the IAP to hold it all together. The IAP is a huge umbrella where once every 3 years there's a Congress. We can listen to each other. We can do some work together, get to know each other. So just to hold the whole of it together, I think the IAP is extremely important.
Yeah. And I suppose the big change in the IAP is that it's moved from like a kind of umbrella organization to allow people to communicate with each other to now doing training. And I wondered what you,
Yeah.
it
Well,
happened gradually, but I wonder what you think about that.
that was the big issue is did the IAP become a training program. And in a sense, it did. These are rooters are in a training program, and I think that needs to be done very carefully, very responsibly. But yes, the IEP is doing that and has to do that in certain areas. Otherwise, it wouldn't get done. There would be no chance that Jungian work would ever grow there. So, if you're interested in having Jungian uh, ideas and practice widely disseminated throughout the world, the IAP and its training program are very important, if not essential. And so I support it. I continue to support it. Very
Well,
much.
and that's obvious because you still do a lot, in different ways. Um, I wanted to ask you I wanted to ask you about the split in Zurich, really, because that kind of shocked the Jungian analytic world, and I wondered about your views and feelings about that personally, since you trained at the Jung Institute then, and then you left the Jung Institute and have been an important part of the development and of ISAP. So I wondered if you could say a bit about how that happened and
Well, let me start with the last part of that. ISAP is really the continuation of the training I knew at the Young Institute,
yeah.
and that it's a full-time residency program. People come and live here. They stay for a number of years and do their training here in Zurich. The Young Institute has developed this block program, which is an in and out program. People come and spend a few weeks per year and do most of the rest of their training at home, which has a economic advantage and in some ways is, for some people at least, a preferable way to train. The split was horrendous. There are, people are still suffering from it. It was traumatic. And it lasted for a number of years from, I think it started around 1996 and ISAP wasn't created until 2004. And it went through a long process of very painful confrontation. Um, I wasn't there for it. I didn't participate in it. What I gather was there were mistakes made on both sides. The problem with the old institute was there was no turnover in the leadership. They it's organized to run as a foundation, and there's what's called a curatorium, which is an executive committee that replaces itself. It is not democratic. And the people who were on that executive committee stayed for way too long. Bartz was president for 30 years, I think. So a kind of hierarchical system established, and there was a lack of planning to turn it over to the next generation. They hung on too long. So when the new generation came along, they wanted to throw them all out and replace them with new people. That was part of the motivation for the big change, and the old ones wanted to hang on. It's one way of looking at it. I think there's a truth in that. Um, but the other side was the way the new generation came in and tried to make the changes was very aggressive and very disruptive and disrespectful. When I met with that curatorium, when I moved over here, I was still president. They invited me to come to a meeting to have a get acquainted meeting. And I asked them, why are you treating your training analysts and elders so disrespectfully? Those were the ones who left, Mario Jacobi, so on, those kind of people, Paul Brucci, John Hill. They laughed at me. I mean, it was very rude. They were very rude people. And they had created an atmosphere. Students didn't want to stand in. Most of the students, training students, left when the new institute was created. They had created a very toxic atmosphere so that it was intolerable for people to stay there. They tried for years to work out a compromise to do something. It just didn't work. And it was because of a couple of people who had gotten into that leadership position and were creating this atmosphere. It's much better now.
yes, and now
Verena Koss is the president now, and she's, an easy person to get along with. She's reasonable. I worked with her for many years in the IAP, and we're good friends, and so we don't have a problem. But the two institutes have developed such differences and different programs and traditions now that when any proposal is made, well, is it possible to get together again? It would be much more financially,
Mm.
um, yeah, it'd be much more economical to run one program than two in Zurich, two staffs, two buildings, all that. They just can't see the way to doing that because there are responsibilities to students here and to here. There are different programs. And I broached this to Verena one time, and she said, "Well, if they do get together again, it won't be in this generation, maybe the next one. So it's going to take time." But the feeling is much better than it used to be. I don't think the old wounds are still there. The ones who went through this battle will never forget it. I mean, they were traumatized and deeply wounded and insulted, and oh, it was terrible. And they still speak of it with pain and anguish.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
that's the residue of it.
And is there a thriving culture here? Can Zurich, hold two different training
It seems
cultures?
to be working. It seems to be working. We both have enough students to continue paying the bills, and training analysts are getting older. We recently had a birthday party at ISEP for 10 people, 8 of whom turned 75 this year and 2 80. All of us still active, mind you. And working as analysts and training analysts and supervisors.
Yes.
So and the new generation is coming up now. So new people that have graduated from ISEP in the last 5 years are beginning to take positions on committees and become training analysts and so on. So I think the future looks pretty good. We've got enough money. We've got our financial situation's good. We have contributors, people who have donated quite a lot of money to keep it going. Uh, so as long as the will and the spirit is good, and the spirit of ISEP has been wonderful. It's a very, very nice community to live in, I find.
And I meant to ask you, what made you decide to come back and I mean, I imagine you will stay here. The wanderlust is kind of settling. But I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to move from Chicago back here? Yeah,
A love affair with Zurich.
a love affair with Syria. Well, that nearly hits Syria.
5 years before we moved back, we rented an apartment right near your hotel there, and we would spend holidays over here.
Yeah.
And as the children grew up and went off to college and so on, and Jan decided she wanted to retire from her practice. We started looking around for other places to live. Would we spend our retirement years in California or Arizona or Florida, which are the typical places? And so we decided in a moment, another synchronistic moment where somebody said something and we saw something and the opportunity was there. I was the president of the IAP at that time, and its headquarters are here. So I had good reason to tell the Swiss government why I'm moving here. It's not easy to get a residency visa. We seized the moment, took the opportunity, and moved, sold everything there, and moved here on the chance that we'd stay here. It's 15 years in now. We're still here, and we want to stay. We love it here. It's a wonderful country to live in, and the Jungian community is very nice to work in, very congenial, many opportunities to teach and work. So, yeah.
Okay. And you've just been 75, shortly after the Avignon conference. You seem as full of life and energy as you always have, and your mind is so sharp. Um, how do you occupy your time at present?
Yeah.
How,
Well,
what do you do with your time, your days, and so?
I have a number of analyzans that I see in this office. I come here twice a week. And then I do quite a bit of Skype work with people in other locations, some in America, some in other parts of the world, some as supervision, some as analysis with people that I worked with in America for many years and they wanted to continue on a weekly basis. Um, so that's a big part of my working time spent that way. And then I write and I publish uh, we keep a household and we have a couple of cats and we take holidays and enjoy life. But each day is full. Um,
Well, that's very encouraging. Now, I notice there's no couch in here when you do your clinical work. Is that deliberate? Yes. Yeah.
I grew up with the face-to-face method of conducting analysis. That's the way I was analyzed by my analysts, and it's what I've continued to do. Um, Never used a couch. I did have a couch in my office in Chicago, but I didn't use it as a couch. It was mostly used as a seating arrangement. I'd sometimes see couples in there as well. Occasionally, somebody would try to use it as a couch for a couple of sessions, but it wasn't comfortable for me. It wasn't comfortable for them. You were trained that way. It's
I was turned that way. Comes
a
out.
preferred method. Yeah.
And okay, and as we come to the end, what do you feel most proud of, do you think, thinking back over, well, a hugely long career? You already qualified when you were 30, so support it.
Well, there were
But
high
really,
points. I don't know if it's what I'm most proud of, but there are high points. I think my presidency of the IAP is definitely a high point.
yeah.
Those 3 years were very significant for me, um, and conducting the Congress in Barcelona and the delegates meeting was a high point. It went very well, and people were happy with it. So um, I think serving the community as a functionary, as a uh, Rafael Lopez Pedraza once called me "Oh, you're a Jungian executive." Those an executive functions very important, and the writing of books, the giving of lectures, um, traveling. I don't travel so much anymore. I don't like airports, hotels. Don't enjoy them. I like the people once I get there. The activities are fine, but the getting and the coming and going, I don't care for. Um, so I'd say it's a combination of the organizational work, serving the community, I call it, and the writing are the two things.
And do you have any regrets or things that you might have wanted to do, which for one reason or another you haven't managed to achieve?
Absolutely not.
Oh, let it.
Not that I did get the moment. No, they. I can't say that I lived by dream. I didn't have this dream. It came to me, and I took it step by step as it came,
Yeah.
and it just opened up in the way it did, and I'm extremely grateful.
That's a lovely way of putting it. And how do you think, I mean, it's clear to me you've got, I say, a huge amount of life left to live and hopefully more writing and teaching. But how do you think you will be remembered personally and professionally, if you had to imagine that?
I think as a teacher,
As a good teacher?
I think so. As a good teacher, I think I hope to have been able to teach in a way that I was taught to inspire students to take an interest in Jung and Jungian psychology. Jung's writings primarily is what I base myself on, which I find endlessly interesting. I'm never bored
Yes.
with it. So to inspire people to take an interest in what I've taken an interest in. And I've done that in various ways recently through the Asheville webinars and then teaching at ISOP, lecturing, writing, so on. I think that would be probably what I would be remembered for. I would hope to be remembered well.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this, and I've learnt a lot about you and about other things too in a broader perspective. And thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity, Jan. It's been a pleasure. Okay, right on time.